For all F1's flapping about trying to fix its occasional boring races, and they are much more occasional than you might think, given all the bluster about it, we have a couple of bad races in a row and we're ready to cast the whole sport into the sea. Anyway, for all the worrying about how to fix F1, most people agree that the current qualifying format is actually pretty decent, perhaps the best the sport has ever had. In the past, we've had qualifying formats which have included having a 1 hour session in which you have 12 laps to set your time. This is fairly pure, except that as the track grip tends to improve with running, no one wanted to be first out on a green track, so the audience would often be staring at an empty circuit for up to half an hour every Saturday. Very frustrating. We had 1 lap shootout qualifying in which cars went out in turn and only had 1 chance to set a perfect lap. The audience got to see every single full lap and there was no margin for error. It was pretty thrilling. The problem here was that, as mentioned a moment ago, the track improved over time, so the first driver to go out would tend to have the track in the worst condition and the last driver would have the grippiest run. Not as pure. To counter this, there was the first qualifying session run in championship order, so the leading car was disadvantaged, which would then decide the real qualifying session, which would be run in the order set by the first qualifying session. So the first quali session was just to get you the best slot in the shootout for the grid. F1 being F1, they did play with this format a little bit and sometimes with no thought at all. As in 2016, they tried a tweak that was dropped after just a few races, in which they would add the times from the 2 qualifying sessions together to decide the grid order. And this ended up being a disaster, partly as first quali was on Saturday and the second was on Sunday, so broadcasters often didn't cover the second quali and no one would bother watching the first quali as it didn't give you the grid order. It was also harder to follow as you had to keep up with the times added together while watching hot laps. Too complicated, badly organised. Which brings us to current qualifying, the knockout format. This works well. The 3 short slots forces all the cars to go out, so we're rarely watching an empty track. We get to focus on the smaller teams for some of the time, watching to see who'll make it through each stage, and it solves a lot of problems and ends up with, for all intents and purposes, a fair and representative grid with just a little drama thrown in. It's been given little tweaks over the past 15 years, but no one really complains about this format. Saturdays are interesting. So, why do F1 keep reaching towards qualifying when they want to shake things up? Now, it's partly because they don't want to mess with the race itself. The race is the pure part of the weekend. You don't want Sundays to go all Mario Kart.
Let's go!
On the other hand, F1 notice how thrilled everyone is when we get a race off the back of a mixed up grid. If, due to weather or misfortune, the front-running cars start from the back or middle of the pack, we get a much more fun race as they have to battle through the field instead of just disappearing off from the front. So F1 can't help but want to engineer that scenario somehow by adding more chance elements to qualifying. In unpurifying qualifying, they think they can spice up the race. Which brings us to the murmurings of F1 wanting to use the double races this season to try a reverse grid sprint race qualifying format. That's a lot of words, isn't it? Now, I agree, reverse grid races, though a lot of fun, are pretty impure and kind of overly punishing of success. But that's if we're talking about the actual Grand Prix race. For a qualifying race, this is a little bit different. The idea is that on Saturday, we'd have a short 30-minute sprint race with a starting grid in reverse championship order. The results of this race would translate to the grid for the real Grand Prix on Sunday. Now, no idea if there'd be pit stops or not, but you'd assume not, as cars can regularly go 30 minutes without stopping, and losing 20 to 25 seconds in a stop would be a big disadvantage in a short race. So maybe just a flat-out sprint with no stops would be just the ticket. 30 minutes is a good time for this. It's long enough that you think the best cars could work their way through to the front, or hopefully most of the way there, but not so long that it becomes a sure thing. Mistakes will be punished. The championship leaders will have to do up to 19 overtakes on slower cars, but slower cars this time do not want to give up any position. Every battle will be valuable. And I think this could be quite fun. It's not pure by any means, but in a season where we're going to have at least 2, possibly up to 4, if rumours are to be believed, races at the same venues, why not have some fun with the format and try something out on the Shadow Companion Grand Prix weekends? The worst result is that we have a mixed up grid for Sunday's Grand Prix, or that we have a Saturday crash that puts a championship contender on the back foot. But everyone is in the same boat here. The rules will be the same for everyone. It will be part of the challenge. And if it really sucks, they can just switch back to the normal format next time. Now, I don't believe this should be the qualifying format going forward into years to come, but I am very keen to see how this plays out. F1 never gets to experiment, and it might finally have that chance in 2020. Let's let them see how it goes.